said I overstepped, that I should have stayed out of it. But when you see a child in danger, you don't think, you act. I stood between innocence and cruelty, and I chose to protect her. I thought the truth would save us both.
But in the end, it put me on trial. They called it misconduct. I still call it doing the right thing.
They said I overstepped, that I should have stayed out of it. But when you see a child in danger, you don't think, you act. I stood between innocence and cruelty, and I chose to protect her. I thought the truth would save us both, but in the end, it put me on trial. They called it misconduct. I still call it doing the right thing. My name is Sarah Matthews, and for 12 years, I taught 4th grade at Riverside Elementary in a quiet town in Pennsylvania. I loved my job. Every September, 25 new faces would walk through my classroom door, and by June, they'd leave as readers, thinkers, and friends. I believed in the power of education, in the sanctity of childhood, in the idea that a classroom could be a safe harbor from the storms raging outside. That belief was tested on a cold Monday morning in November. Her name was Emma Chen, 9 years old, with dark hair always pulled into a neat ponytail and eyes that seemed too old for her small face. She was one of those quiet students who never caused trouble, always turned in her homework on time, and smiled politely when you called on her. But there was something about Emma that worried me, a tension in her shoulders, a flinch when someone moved too quickly, a sadness that no child should carry. That Monday, she came to school wearing a turtleneck despite the classroom heater being broken and the temperature barely reaching 60 degrees. It wasn't the turtleneck that alarmed me. It was the way she held her left arm, cradling it against her body like something precious and broken. "Emma, are you okay?" I asked during silent reading time, kneeling beside her desk. "I'm fine, Miss Matthews," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Your arm." I fell. At home. On the stairs. The words came out rehearsed, mechanical. I'd heard variations of this excuse before, in my years of teaching, and each time my stomach twisted with the same dread. "Can I see?" I asked gently. She shook her head, tears suddenly brimming in her eyes. "Please don't make me." That's when I knew. That's when everything changed. I didn't send her to the nurse. I didn't call her parents first. I took Emma to the school counselor, Mrs. Patricia Wilson, a woman I'd trusted for years. Together, we sat with Emma in a small, warm office decorated with encouraging posters and comfortable chairs, and we asked her the questions that needed to be asked. At first, she wouldn't say anything. She stared at her hands, picking at her fingernails, her whole body trembling. "Emma," I said softly, "you're safe here. Whatever you tell us stays between us until we figure out how to help you. Okay?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the war happening behind her eyes, the desperate need to tell someone fighting against the fear that had been beaten into her. "My dad," she finally whispered. "When he gets angry, he hurts me." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Mrs. Wilson and I exchanged glances. This was protocol territory now. We were mandatory reporters. We had a legal and moral obligation to contact Child Protective Services immediately. But I also knew what came next. The investigation, the questions, the possibility that Emma would be sent right back into that house while they looked into things. "Can you show us your arm?" Mrs. Wilson asked. Slowly, painfully, Emma rolled up her sleeve. The bruises were dark purple and yellow, fingerprints clearly visible where someone had grabbed her with brutal force. There were older marks, too, fading scars that told a story of repeated violence. I felt my heart break and rage ignite simultaneously. "We're going to help you," I promised her, taking her small hand in mine. "I promise you, Emma. You're not going back there until we know you're safe." I meant every word. I had no idea that promise would destroy my career, divide my community, and put me on trial for doing what I thought was right. But I'd make the same choice again. The call to Child Protective Services happened within the hour. "Mrs. Wilson dialed while I sat with Emma in the counselor's office, reading to her from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, anything to keep her mind off what was coming. My hands shook as I turned the pages, but I kept my voice steady, soothing. Emma leaned against my shoulder, exhausted from finally telling her truth. The principal, Mr. Robert Donovan, was informed immediately. He was a careful man, more concerned with district policies and legal liability than with the children under his care. When he arrived at the counselor's office, his face was pinched with worry, though I suspected it wasn't worry for Emma. "Sarah," he said, pulling me aside into the hallway. "You did the right thing calling CPS, but we need to be very careful here. The Chen family is prominent." I stared at him. "Prominent?" "David Chen is a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the biggest law firms in the county. He sits on the school board's advisory committee. We need to follow protocol exactly, or this could become complicated." "A child is being abused," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "It's already complicated. I understand your feelings, Sarah. But my feelings? This isn't about feelings. This is about a 9-year-old girl with bruises shaped like her father's hands." Mr. Donovan's jaw tightened. "Just let CPS handle it from here. Don't get more involved than necessary." But I was already involved. Emma had trusted me with her darkest secret, and I wasn't going to abandon her to bureaucracy. The CPS caseworker arrived 2 hours later, a tired woman named Jennifer Ross, who looked like she'd seen too much and slept too little. She interviewed Emma privately while I waited outside, pacing the hallway, checking my watch every 30 seconds. When they emerged, Emma's eyes were red from crying, and Ms. Ross's expression was unreadable. "We're going to place Emma in emergency foster care while we investigate," she told me. "She can't go home today." Relief flooded through me. At least she'd be safe for now. Emma left with Ms. Ross, carrying nothing but her backpack. As they walked toward the exit, she turned and looked back at me, her eyes full of fear and gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Matthews," she mouthed silently. I nodded, tears burning my throat. That afternoon, after my students had left for the day, I sat alone in my classroom, staring at Emma's empty desk. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, the November sky was gray and heavy with coming snow. I felt hollow and electric all at once, relieved that Emma was safe, terrified about what would happen next. My phone buzzed. A text from my husband, Michael. "How was your day?" I didn't know how to answer that. Small towns have a way of protecting their own, especially when their own means the powerful ones. The town where this happened thought they were immune to these kinds of problems. Maybe your town feels the same way, but the truth is, these stories happen everywhere, even in places that seem perfect on the surface. What town do you think this is? Drop your guess in the comments below. By the time I got home that evening, the first phone call had already come. It was David Chen. Michael handed me his cell phone with a worried expression. "He asked for you specifically. Said it was urgent." I took the phone, my hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Ms. Matthews," Chen's voice was smooth, controlled, dangerous. "I understand you made some very serious accusations against me today." "I didn't make accusations, Mr. Chen. Your daughter disclosed abuse, and I reported it as I'm legally required to do. My daughter is a confused child with an overactive imagination. She fell down the stairs. I have witnesses who can confirm this." "Witnesses in your own home? This is a misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand. I'm willing to overlook your overzealous response. If you're willing to clarify your report, tell CPS you may have misinterpreted the situation." My blood ran cold. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to recognize reality, Ms. Matthews. I'm a respected member of this community. I have resources, I have influence, and I have lawyers. You're a public school teacher making, what, $45,000 a year? Do you really want to go to war with me over a bruise from a childhood accident?" The threat was clear. "Emma is safe now," I said quietly, "and I sleep well knowing that." I hung up. Michael stared at me. "Sarah, what have you gotten into?" "The right thing," I said, but my hands were shaking. The next morning, everything changed. I arrived at Riverside Elementary at 7:30, the same as always, carrying my travel mug of coffee and a tote bag full of student assignments to grade. The parking lot was nearly empty, just the janitor's truck and Mr. Donovan's sedan in his reserved spot. The moment I walked through the front doors, I knew something was wrong. Mr. Donovan was waiting for me in the main hallway, along with the district's human resources director, a severe-looking woman named Carol Brennan, whom I'd only met twice before. Both of their faces were carefully neutral. "Sarah," Mr. Donovan said, "we need to speak with you in my office. Now." My coffee suddenly tasted like acid. In the principal's office, they sat across from me while I occupied the chair usually reserved for misbehaving students. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Sarah, we've received a formal complaint," Ms. Brennan began, consulting a folder thick with documents. "David Chen has filed a grievance alleging that you've made false allegations against him, influenced his daughter to lie, and violated district protocol in how you handled the situation. I felt like I'd been punched. That's not true. I followed protocol exactly. I'm a mandatory reporter. You also kept his daughter in the building for over 3 hours without parental notification. Ms. Brennan continued, Mr. Chen contends that you coached Emma on what to say to CPS. He has character witnesses willing to testify that he's a devoted father and that Emma has a history of attention-seeking behavior. Attention-seeking? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. She has bruises. CPS examined Emma. Mr. Donovan interrupted. They found bruising consistent with a fall. Emma told the investigator this morning that she might have made things sound worse because she was scared of getting in trouble for being careless on the stairs. The room tilted. She's recanting because she's terrified, I said desperately. This is textbook abuse victim behavior. They manipulated her overnight. That's speculation, Sarah, Ms. Brennan said coldly. What we have are facts. You made a report. The report was investigated. The evidence doesn't support your claims. And now a prominent family is threatening to sue both you and the district for defamation, emotional distress, and interference with parental rights. So you're taking his side, I said flatly. We're protecting the district, she replied. Effective immediately. You're being placed on administrative leave with pay pending a full investigation. You're not to contact Emma Chen or her family. You're not to discuss this case with other faculty members. You're to surrender your keys and leave campus immediately. The words didn't feel real. You're suspending me for protecting a child? We're suspending you for potentially violating protocol and making unsubstantiated allegations, Mr. Donovan said, unable to meet my eyes. Sarah, if you'd just followed procedure more carefully. I did follow procedure. My voice rose, anger finally breaking through shock. I saw the bruises. I heard her disclosure. I called CPS. I did everything by the book. The book also says you don't keep a child from their parents without clear evidence of imminent danger, Ms. Brennan said. Mr. Chen is arguing that you let your personal feelings about him override your professional judgment. My personal feelings? I'd never even met the man before yesterday. He's provided emails showing that you once signed a petition opposing a development project his firm represented. He contends you have a bias against him. I laughed bitterly. I signed a petition to save the community park 3 years ago along with 800 other residents. That's my supposed bias? But I could see it didn't matter. The decision had already been made. David Chen had resources, influence, and lawyers. I had convictions and a mortgage. Your keys, Ms. Brennan said, extending her hand. With shaking fingers, I removed my classroom key from my keyring and placed it in her palm. It felt like surrendering a piece of my identity. This isn't over, I said quietly. For your sake, Sarah, I hope it is, Mr. Donovan replied. And there was genuine worry in his eyes, though whether it was worry for me or for the district, I couldn't tell. I walked out of Riverside Elementary that morning, not as a teacher, but as a suspect. The hallway had never felt so long. The news spread through town faster than I thought possible. By the time I got home at 8:30 that morning, my phone was already exploding with texts. Some were supportive, fellow teachers expressing shock and solidarity, but others were hostile, accusatory, laced with the kind of righteous anger that comes from people who've already chosen their side. How could you attack David Chen like that? You should be ashamed. That man does so much for this community. Maybe you're just a bitter woman looking for attention. I turned my phone off and sat in my kitchen, staring at nothing. Michael found me there an hour later. He worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and he'd been in his studio with headphones on, unaware of the morning's catastrophe. When I told him everything, his face cycled through disbelief, anger, and fear. They suspended you? He said, his voice rising. For protecting a kid? They suspended me for supposedly overstepping, I corrected bitterly. And now Emma's back home with her father, probably more terrified than before, and I can't do anything about it. Sarah. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was trying to solve a problem that had no easy solution. Maybe you should get a lawyer. With what money? We're barely covering the mortgage as it is. This isn't fair. No, I agreed. It isn't. But fair had stopped mattering the moment David Chen made his phone call. Over the next few days, I learned what it meant to be on the wrong side of power in a small town. The local Facebook groups erupted in debate. Someone created a thread titled, "Teacher Makes False Abuse Claims Against Respected Lawyer," that got over 300 comments in 12 hours. People who'd never met me suddenly had strong opinions about my character, my motives, my fitness to teach. She's probably jealous of successful families. Teachers think they know better than parents these days. This is what happens when people get too woke. A smaller counter-thread appeared. Support Sarah Matthews, but it was quickly buried under the wave of pro-Chen sentiment. A few brave parents shared stories of their own experiences with Emma. Quiet observations about how withdrawn she'd become over the past year, how she'd stopped coming to birthday parties, how she flinched at loud noises. But these testimonies were dismissed as speculation or jumping on the bandwagon. The Chen family's PR strategy was masterful. David gave a tearful interview to the local newspaper, playing the role of wounded father perfectly. He spoke about Emma's recent struggles with anxiety, her tendency toward dramatic storytelling, his family's commitment to her well-being. He never directly attacked me. That would have looked vindictive. Instead, he expressed concern that a well-meaning teacher had misinterpreted a situation and potentially traumatized his daughter with an unnecessary investigation. The article included a photo of David Chen with Emma at a charity event, both of them smiling. Emma wore a pretty dress and looked happy. "Look at them," the comments said. "Does that look like an abusive father?" What they didn't see was what happened when the cameras turned off. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show everyone the photo I'd taken of Emma's bruises before CPS arrived, but doing so would violate student privacy laws and probably destroy what remained of my career. I was bound by ethics that David Chen clearly didn't share. On the 4th day of my suspension, I received a letter from the school district's legal department. They were conducting a formal investigation into my conduct. I was invited to provide a statement, with or without legal representation, within 2 weeks. That same day, I received another letter, this one from Morrison & Associates, David Chen's law firm. It was a cease and desist, demanding that I stop making defamatory statements about David Chen, stop harassing his family, and refrain from any further contact with Emma. It threatened a civil lawsuit for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with familial relations. The damages they were seeking, $500,000. I sat on my couch holding both letters, feeling the walls close in. Michael read them over my shoulder. "Jesus, Sarah. We need a lawyer. Now." "I know," I whispered. But knowing and doing were two different things when you were a suspended teacher facing a legal war machine. I found a lawyer through a friend of a friend, an older man named Thomas Brenner, who'd practiced family law for 30 years and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. His office was in a converted house on the edge of town, filled with dusty law books and photographs of grateful clients. He listened to my story without interrupting, his weathered hands folded on his desk, his eyes sharp and assessing. When I finished, he sat back and sighed. "This is going to be hard," he said bluntly. "David Chen has resources and reputation on his side. You have conviction, and a report that didn't pan out. Juries don't like uncertainty. But Emma told me, I believe you," he interrupted gently. "But belief isn't evidence. And right now, Emma's recantation makes you look like either a liar or someone who let their emotions cloud their judgment. So what do? We build a case," Thomas said. "We document everything. We find other witnesses. We establish a pattern. And we prepare for the possibility that this goes to court, both the civil suit and potentially a hearing for your teaching license." My license? The thought hadn't even occurred to me. They could take my license? If the district's investigation concludes you violated professional standards, yes. Pennsylvania takes educator misconduct seriously, even when that misconduct is well-intentioned. I felt sick. "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked quietly. Thomas named a retainer that made my stomach drop. Even with his discount for good causes, it was more than Michael and I had in savings. "We'll figure it out," he said, seeing my expression. "First things first. We need to understand what really happened in that house, and we need to do it carefully, because Chen's lawyers are watching for any misstep they can use against you." Over the following weeks, Thomas did what I couldn't do alone. He hired a private investigator, a woman named Rita Ochoa, who specialized in family cases. He filed Freedom of Information requests for Emma's school records, medical history, and prior CPS reports. He interviewed my colleagues at Riverside Elementary, though most were too frightened to say anything that might jeopardize their own positions. Mrs. Wilson, the school counselor, was one of the few who stood firm. "I was there," she told Thomas during a recorded interview in his office. "I saw Emma's bruises. I heard her disclosure. Sarah Matthews did everything right. If anyone violated protocol, It was the administration for not supporting her. But Mrs. Wilson also admitted she had no documentation of Emma's disclosure. We'd been focused on the crisis, not on building a legal case. Rita's investigation turned up some interesting information. Emma had been to the emergency room twice in the past 18 months, once for a fall that resulted in a sprained wrist, once for a playground accident that left her with cracked ribs. Both times, David Chen had been the parent who brought her in. Both times, the hospital had noted the injuries but hadn't filed abuse reports. "It's suspicious," Rita told me during one of our meetings, "but not conclusive. Kids do get injured. And Chen's a charming guy. The ER staff remember him as concerned and appropriate. He's a lawyer," I said bitterly. "He knows exactly how to play the system." "Probably," Rita agreed, "but proving that is another matter." The private investigator also discovered something else. David Chen's first wife, Emma's mother, had died 3 years ago. According to public records, it was a car accident. She'd lost control on a rainy road and crashed into a guardrail. The police report listed no suspicious circumstances, but when Rita tracked down the first wife's sister, a woman named Michelle Parsons living 2 states away, a different picture emerged. "Catherine was terrified of David," Michelle told us during a phone call that Thomas recorded. "She called me 2 weeks before she died, saying she wanted to leave him but was afraid of what he'd do. She said he had anger issues, that he'd pushed her once, that she was worried about Emma growing up in that environment." "Did she ever report the abuse?" Thomas asked. "No. She said David had too many connections, that no one would believe her. And then," Michelle's voice broke, "and then she died, and David got custody of Emma, and there was nothing I could do." "You think her death wasn't an accident?" A long pause. "I think Catherine was a careful driver who'd lived in that town her whole life and knew every dangerous curve. And I think she was planning to leave David the week she died. That's all I can say. It wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. And patterns," Thomas said, "were what built cases. While Thomas and Rita built our defense, my life continued to unravel." The school district's investigation concluded after 6 weeks. Their finding: insufficient evidence to support continued employment pending resolution of legal matters. Translation: I was being terminated, effective immediately, without pay. 12 years of service, gone. The teachers' union fought for me, to their credit. They filed a grievance arguing that I'd been denied due process, but the district had covered their legal bases carefully. I wasn't being fired for reporting abuse. I was being fired for exercising poor professional judgment, failing to follow district communication protocols, and creating legal liability for the district. The union lawyer told me bluntly, "They're going to win this. The best we can hope for is a settlement that lets you resign instead of being terminated." "I don't want to resign," I said. "I didn't do anything wrong. Sarah, if you're terminated for cause, you'll never teach again. Not in Pennsylvania, probably not anywhere. Is that the hill you want to die on?" But it wasn't about the hill. It was about Emma, alone in that house, living with a monster that everyone believed was a devoted father. The settlement offer came through a week later. I could resign, preserve my teaching license, and receive 3 months of severance pay. In exchange, I would sign a non-disparagement agreement and waive my right to sue the district. I stared at the papers for a long time. "If you don't take this," Michael said gently, "we lose the house. We've burned through our savings on legal fees. I'm picking up extra work, but it's not enough." "I know," I whispered. "You did the right thing, Sarah. You saved that little girl, but you can't save her if you destroy yourself in the process." He was right, logically, but logic felt like betrayal. I signed the papers. The civil lawsuit from David Chen was still pending. That was separate from the employment matter. Thomas filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that my actions were protected under mandatory reporter statutes. But Chen's lawyers countered that I'd exceeded my duties and acted with malice. The court scheduled a hearing for December. Meanwhile, I tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I applied for teaching positions in neighboring districts, but word had spread. 3 interviews resulted in 3 polite rejections. One principal was honest enough to tell me, "I believe you did the right thing, but I can't afford the controversy. I'm sorry." I took a job at a local bookstore, shelving inventory for $12 an hour. It was humiliating after 12 years as a professional educator, but it was income. The hardest part was driving past Riverside Elementary every day. I could see my classroom window from the street, see another teacher's decorations hanging where mine used to be. I wondered if Emma was okay. if she thought I'd abandoned her, if she understood why I couldn't be there anymore. Then, in early December, Rita called with news. "I found something," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Emma's pediatrician, Dr. Susan Park. She's been Emma's doctor since birth, and she's willing to talk to us, off the record." We met Dr. Park at a coffee shop 30 minutes outside of town. She was a small, serious woman in her 50s who looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks. "I can't testify officially," she said immediately. "Chen would sue me for violating HIPAA, and I'd lose my practice. But I need to tell someone, and maybe you can use this information somehow." "Tell us what?" Thomas asked, leaning forward. "Emma Chen has been my patient for 9 years. In the past 3 years since her mother died, I've documented 15 separate injuries. Bruises, sprains, 1 suspected concussion. Every time David Chen brings her in with a plausible explanation. Kids fall, kids have accidents. But," she pulled out a notebook, hands shaking slightly. "I've been keeping personal notes, separate from her official file. The pattern is undeniable. The injuries cluster around times when Chen is stressed, after he loses cases, during holidays, when Emma's grades slip. And Emma's behavior has changed dramatically. She used to be bubbly and talkative. Now she barely speaks during appointments." "Have you reported this to CPS?" I asked. "Twice," Dr. Park said, her voice breaking. "Both times the investigations went nowhere. Chen is too careful. He never leaves marks where they'd be immediately visible. He has explanations ready, and he's important enough that caseworkers give him the benefit of the doubt." "So what changed?" Thomas asked. "Why talk to us now?" Dr. Park met my eyes. "Because Emma came in last week. She needed her annual checkup for school. When I examined her," she pulled out her phone, showed us photographs she'd taken during the appointment. "New bruises, fresher ones. Since she recanted and went back home, the abuse has gotten worse, and I think it's because he knows he can get away with it now. You challenged him, Ms. Matthews, and the system sided with him. He's emboldened." The photos showed bruises on Emma's ribs, her upper arms, her back. "She's in danger," Dr. Park said. "Real danger, and I don't know what to do about it except help you fight him. So use this information however you can. Just, please, save that little girl." Thomas looked at me. "This changes everything." I stared at the photographs, feeling rage and hope war inside me. "Then let's finish this," I said. The civil trial was scheduled for mid-January. David Chen's lawyers were seeking $500,000 in damages and had filed a motion for summary judgment, essentially asking the judge to rule in their favor without even going to trial, arguing that my actions were so clearly wrong that no reasonable jury would side with me. Thomas fought the motion with everything he had, submitting Dr. Park's informal notes as evidence that my concerns about Emma had been legitimate. Chen's lawyers immediately filed a counter-motion to exclude the notes, arguing they violated patient confidentiality and were inadmissible. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Holloway, who'd been on the bench for 20 years, took 2 weeks to decide. Her ruling came down on a gray January morning. The notes would be admitted as evidence establishing reasonable suspicion, but Dr. Park could not be compelled to testify due to HIPAA protections. It was a partial victory. We had some evidence, but not the witness who could speak to it directly. "It's enough," Thomas said. "It establishes a pattern. Now we need to convince the jury that you acted reasonably, based on what you knew at the time." The trial began on January 18th in the county courthouse, a old building with marble floors and wooden pews that looked more like a church than a place of justice. I wore a simple navy dress. Thomas's advice was to look professional, but not intimidating. "You're a teacher, not a lawyer," he said. "Let the jury see you as human." David Chen arrived in an expensive suit with 2 attorneys flanking him like bodyguards. He looked every inch the successful, wronged family man. I noticed he'd brought Emma to the courthouse. She sat in the gallery, pale and silent, watching the proceedings with frightened eyes. Our eyes met once. She looked away immediately. It broke my heart. The trial opened with Chen's lawyers painting me as a zealot with poor judgment, who'd traumatized an innocent family. Their narrative was polished and persuasive. I was a struggling teacher, frustrated with my career, looking for drama and meaning. When Emma fell down the stairs and came to school hurt, I'd latched onto a rescue fantasy instead of following proper protocol. Sarah Matthews decided she knew better than trained investigators. Chen's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Morrison, told the jury during opening statements. She decided she knew better than doctors, better than family, better than common sense. Her reckless accusations have caused my client immeasurable pain, damaged his reputation, and traumatized his daughter. This case is about accountability. It's about teaching teachers that they cannot play detective and destroy lives without consequences. Thomas's opening statement was quieter, but no less powerful. This case is about a woman who saw a child in danger and did what the law requires her to do. Report it, he told the jury. Sarah Matthews didn't invent Emma Chen's bruises. She didn't invent her disclosure of abuse. She documented what she saw and heard, called Child Protective Services as required by Pennsylvania law, and made sure that child was safe until trained investigators could assess the situation. The state investigated, and, due to lack of cooperation and a victim's recantation, something that happens in 70% of child abuse cases, did not file charges. That doesn't mean Ms. Matthews was wrong. It means the system failed Emma Chen. And now David Chen wants to punish the one person who tried to protect his daughter. Ask yourselves, if your child disclosed abuse to a teacher, would you want that teacher to ignore it? Or would you want them to do exactly what Sarah Matthews did? The first day of testimony was Chen's parade of character witnesses. Colleagues from his law firm described him as dedicated and ethical. Neighbors testified about what a loving father he appeared to be. His late wife's parents, Emma's grandparents, took the stand and said they'd never seen any sign of abuse, that their son-in-law was devoted to Emma. After our daughter died, David could have fallen apart, Emma's grandmother said, dabbing her eyes. Instead, he became both mother and father to that little girl. He sacrificed so much for her. This accusation is cruel and unfounded. I sat at the defendant's table, taking notes, trying not to show emotion, but inside, I was screaming. The second day of trial was mine. Thomas called me to the stand, and I walked to the witness box on shaking legs. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and looked at the 12 faces in the jury box. 6 men, 6 women, all strangers who would decide whether protecting a child made me a hero or a villain. Thomas asked me to tell my story, so I did. I described Emma's behavior over the months I'd taught her. The withdrawal, the flinching, the sadness. I described that Monday morning when she came in cradling her arm. I described asking her what happened and hearing the rehearsed explanation. I described the moment she rolled up her sleeve and I saw the bruises. What went through your mind when you saw those marks? Thomas asked. Terror, I said honestly, and determination. I knew what they were. I've been a mandatory reporter for 12 years. I've taken the training every year. I knew abuse when I saw it. And I knew I had a legal and moral duty to report it. Did you coach Emma on what to say? Never. I asked open-ended questions. I documented what she told me voluntarily. I followed every protocol I was trained to follow. Did you have any personal vendetta against David Chen? I'd never met the man before that week. I didn't know he was a lawyer. Didn't know he was prominent. I saw a hurt child. That's all. Thomas nodded. Your witness. Chen's attorney stood. Time for the cross-examination. Ms. Matthews? Morrison began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You care deeply about children, don't you? Yes. Maybe too deeply? I frowned. I don't know what that means. Let me clarify. He approached the witness stand. You've been a teacher for 12 years, but you don't have children of your own, correct? Objection, Thomas said immediately. Relevance? I'm establishing the witness's emotional state, Morrison replied smoothly. Overruled, Judge Holloway said. Answer the question. No, I said quietly. I don't have children. You've tried though, haven't you? My stomach dropped. Objection. Thomas was on his feet. This is completely irrelevant and invasive. Your Honor, I'm establishing that the witness may have projected her own maternal desires onto this situation, Morrison argued. Judge Holloway frowned. Tread carefully, counselor. I'll allow it, but make your point quickly. Morrison turned back to me. You've undergone fertility treatments, haven't you, Ms. Matthews? I felt exposed, violated. Yes. Unsuccessful ones? Yes. My voice was barely a whisper. So you've wanted a child desperately, couldn't have one, and then you met Emma Chen, a vulnerable little girl who seemed to need saving. Isn't it possible that your desire to be someone's protector clouded your professional judgment? Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. My personal life has nothing to do with this. Emma had bruises. She disclosed abuse. Those are facts, not projections. Or, Morrison said smoothly, Emma fell down the stairs. A kind teacher overreacted, and a desperate woman looking for purpose convinced herself she was saving a child who didn't need saving. That's not what happened, isn't it? He walked back to his table, picked up a document. According to the CPS investigation, Emma recanted her story within 24 hours. She admitted she'd exaggerated because she was afraid of getting in trouble for falling. Doesn't that suggest you influenced her original statement? It suggests she was pressured to recant by someone who frightened her. I shot back. You have no evidence of that. I have years of training in recognizing abuse dynamics. Recantation is common when victims return to their abusers, or when they realize they've said something untrue and want to set the record straight. Morrison smiled coldly. No further questions. I stepped down from the witness stand feeling like I'd been gutted. The trial continued for 3 more days. Thomas called Mrs. Wilson, who testified about Emma's disclosure and the bruises we'd both witnessed. Chen's lawyers discredited her testimony by pointing out she'd made no contemporaneous notes and couldn't produce photographs or documentation beyond her memory. Thomas called 2 teachers who'd taught Emma in previous years. They testified cautiously about changes in Emma's behavior, how she'd become quieter, more withdrawn. But under cross-examination, they admitted they'd never seen evidence of abuse, never made reports, and couldn't say definitively that abuse had occurred. Rita, our private investigator, testified about the pattern of emergency room visits. Chen's lawyers argued that active children get injured, that there was nothing suspicious about a father seeking medical care for his daughter. The most damaging testimony came from the CPS investigator, Jennifer Ross. Chen's lawyers called her as a witness, and she explained matter-of-factly why the case had been closed. Emma's injuries were consistent with a fall, she testified. When we interviewed her in a safe environment, away from both Ms. Matthews and her father, she recanted the abuse allegation. She said she'd been scared and confused, and that Ms. Matthews had asked her questions that made her think she should say her father hurt her. Did Emma specifically say Ms. Matthews coached her? Morrison asked. She said Ms. Matthews kept asking if her father hurt her, and that she eventually said yes because she thought that's what Ms. Matthews wanted to hear. The courtroom buzzed. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that I'd asked open-ended questions, that Emma had disclosed voluntarily, but I couldn't interrupt. I could only sit there and watch my credibility crumble. Thomas did his best on cross-examination. Ms. Ross, in your experience, do abuse victims sometimes recant their stories? Yes? Is it common for them to recant when they're returned to the custody of their alleged abuser? It can happen, yes. Did you consider that possibility when Emma recanted? Ross hesitated. We considered all possibilities. But we had no physical evidence beyond bruises that could be explained by a fall, and the victim herself was denying abuse. We can't remove children from homes based on speculation. Even when a trained educator reports concern, teachers aren't investigators. They can report, and we appreciate that. But we have to follow evidence, not suspicions. It was a professional answer that damned me nonetheless. On the 4th day, David Chen himself took the stand. He was perfect, composed, sorrowful, dignified. He described the morning Emma fell down the stairs, how he'd been in the kitchen making breakfast when he heard her scream, how he'd rushed to find her crumpled at the bottom of the staircase, crying and holding her arm, how he'd comforted her, checked her over, determined she was bruised but not seriously injured. I told her to be more careful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She's always been a bit clumsy, and those stairs are steep. I've told her 100 times to hold the railing, but she's 9 years old. Kids don't always listen. Did you ever abuse your daughter? Morrison asked directly. Never. Chen looked at the jury, his eyes sincere and wounded. Emma is everything to me. She's all I have left of my wife. The idea that I would hurt her. It's devastating. It's obscene. How has this accusation affected you? It's destroyed my reputation. Clients have questioned my character. Colleagues whisper. My daughter has been traumatized by being taken from her home and questioned by strangers. And through it all, I've had to stay strong for Emma while dealing with the knowledge that people believe I'm a monster. His voice cracked. I'm not a monster. I'm just a father trying to raise his daughter alone. Several jurors looked sympathetic. I felt my hope dying. Thomas's cross-examination was aggressive. Mr. Chen, your daughter has been to the emergency room 15 times in 3 years. Doesn't that seem excessive? Kids get hurt. She plays sports. She's active. She's had a concussion, cracked ribs, multiple sprains, and numerous bruises, all explained as accidents. Because they were accidents. Isn't it true that your late wife called her sister 2 weeks before her death expressing fear of you? Chen's composure slipped for just a moment. A flash of anger crossed his face before he recovered. My wife was struggling with depression after a miscarriage. Her sister has always resented me. That allegation is false and hurtful. You're under oath, Mr. Chen. Did you ever push your wife? No. Did you ever lose your temper with her? All couples argue. That's not abuse. Did you ever hit Emma? Never. Thomas paused, letting the silence stretch. Your wife died in a single car accident 3 years ago. Convenient timing for you to gain sole custody. Objection. Morrison was on his feet. That's outrageous speculation and completely inappropriate. Sustained, Judge Holloway said sharply. Mr. Brenner, watch yourself. But the seed was planted. A few jurors looked troubled. Thomas pressed on. Mr. Chen, if you're such a devoted father, why did Emma tell her teacher you hurt her? I don't know, Chen said, recovering his composure. Children sometimes say things for attention. Or perhaps she was influenced by someone who wanted to believe the worst about me. Or perhaps she was telling the truth. She wasn't, Chen said firmly. And this trial is proving that. When Chen stepped down, I knew we were losing. The closing arguments came the next day. Morrison's was theatrical and effective. He painted me as a broken woman who'd destroyed an innocent family because of my own psychological needs. He asked the jury to send a message that false accusations have consequences. Thomas's closing was passionate, but couldn't overcome the weight of Emma's recantation and the CPS investigation. Sarah Matthews saw something wrong and reported it, Thomas told the jury. That's not misconduct. That's courage. The system failed Emma Chen. But Sarah Matthews didn't, even if you believe no abuse occurred, and I would argue the evidence suggests otherwise. Sarah Matthews acted in good faith based on reasonable suspicion. You cannot punish someone for trying to protect a child, because if you do, every teacher in this country will think twice before making that call, and children will suffer. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Holloway asked. We have, Your Honor, the foreman said. In the matter of Chen versus Matthews, how do you find? The foreman looked at me. Was there sympathy in his eyes? Or pity? We find in favor of the plaintiff, David Chen. The courtroom erupted. I heard Michael gasp beside me. Thomas put a hand on my shoulder. We award damages in the amount of $50,000 for defamation and emotional distress. $50,000. Not the $500,000 Chen had asked for, but still more money than Michael and I had. It was a compromise verdict. The jury believed Chen had been wronged but didn't want to destroy me completely. Small comfort. Judge Holloway banged her gavel, calling for order. She set a date for post-trial motions and dismissed the court. I sat frozen as people filed out around me. Chen's lawyer shook his hand, congratulating him. Chen himself looked satisfied but not triumphant. The performance of a wronged man vindicated. Emma was led out by Chen's mother, her eyes downcast. She didn't look at me. I'm sorry, Sarah, Thomas said quietly. We'll appeal. There are grounds. No, I interrupted. No more. I can't do this anymore. Michael pulled me into a hug. I didn't cry. I was too numb for tears. We'd lost. David Chen had won. And Emma was still trapped in that house, with no one left to fight for her. The weeks after the trial were the darkest of my life. The local newspaper ran the verdict as front-page news. Teacher found liable for false abuse claims. The online comments were brutal. I stopped reading them after the first dozen. Michael and I met with a bankruptcy attorney to discuss our options. Between my legal fees and the judgment against me, we were drowning in debt. The attorney suggested we could file for Chapter 7, liquidate our assets, possibly keep the house if we could prove hardship. Or, he said delicately, you could reach out to Mr. Chen's attorneys about a payment plan. The idea of being financially tied to David Chen for years made me physically ill, but it might be our only option. I spent my days working at the bookstore, re-shelf novels, and forcing smiles at customers who sometimes recognized me and quickly looked away. I spent my nights lying awake, wondering if Emma was okay, hating myself for failing her. Thomas called occasionally with updates on potential appeals, but his tone suggested he didn't think we'd succeed. The jury had deliberated carefully. The judge's instructions had been proper, and Emma's recantation was damning evidence. Appeals courts rarely overturned jury verdicts without clear legal errors. I'm sorry, Thomas said during one call. I really thought we had a chance. So did I replied. But something unexpected happened 6 weeks after the trial. I was at work, organizing the children's section, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Ms. Matthews? The voice was young, frightened. It's Emma. My heart stopped. Emma, are you okay? How did you... I took my dad's old phone. He doesn't know I have it. She was whispering, talking fast. I need to tell you the truth. I lied at the trial. My dad made me say those things. He coached me on what to tell the CPS lady and what to tell the jury. He said if I didn't, something bad would happen to me. I ducked into the store's back room, my hands shaking. Emma, where are you right now? Home. He's at work. But Ms. Matthews, it's getting worse. After the trial, he was so angry. He said you almost ruined everything and that I better never mess up again. Last night her voice broke. He hurt me really bad, and I'm scared he's going to do it again. Emma, listen to me. I'm going to help you, okay? But I need you to do something. Can you take pictures of your injuries? With what? The phone you're using. Take pictures and send them to this number. Can you do that? I think so. Good. And Emma, hide that phone where your dad won't find it. And don't tell anyone you called me. Not yet, okay? Okay. A pause. Ms. Matthews, I'm sorry I lied. I was so scared. I know, honey. I know. You're being very brave right now. She hung up. 2 minutes later, 3 photos came through. I opened them and felt rage like I'd never experienced before. Fresh bruises covered Emma's ribs and back. There was a welt on her shoulder that looked like it had come from a belt. Her eye was swollen and discolored. David Chen had beaten her badly, and now I had proof. I called Thomas immediately. We need to file an emergency motion. Now. Within hours, we were back in Judge Holloway's chambers with a motion to reopen the case based on new evidence. Chen's lawyers fought it viciously, arguing the photos could have been faked, that I might have coached Emma to injure herself, that this was a desperate attempt to relitigate a settled matter. But Judge Holloway looked at those photographs, and her face went hard. I'm ordering an immediate welfare check, she said, and I'm issuing an emergency protective order. Emma Chen is to be removed from her father's custody pending a full investigation. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, Morrison began. So is a child showing up with these injuries weeks after a trial where her father claimed he'd never hurt her, Holloway interrupted coldly. We're done here. Bailiff, contact CPS immediately. The welfare check happened that afternoon. When police and CPS arrived at Chen's office to inform him Emma was being removed from his custody, he went ballistic. He threatened to sue everyone involved, screamed about false accusations and harassment, demanded to speak to his lawyers, but Emma was already in protective custody, and this time, she didn't recant. With the protective order in place and Emma in a safe environment, she gave a full statement to investigators. She described 3 years of abuse, beatings, verbal cruelty, constant fear. She explained how her father had coached her to lie after my initial report, threatening that if she didn't, he'd make sure she never saw her grandparents again. She explained that after the trial, the abuse had intensified because he felt invincible. Dr. Park, no longer bound by the same confidentiality concerns, now that criminal charges were being filed, came forward officially with all her documentation. Rita's investigation notes were re-examined. And the district attorney, a woman named Patricia Gomez who'd been following the case, announced she was filing criminal charges against David Chen for aggravated assault, child abuse, and intimidation of a witness. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. Police showed up at Morrison & Associates and walked David Chen out in handcuffs in front of his colleagues. The local news ran the footage on loop. The same people who'd condemned me suddenly had questions. The online comments shifted. People who'd been so certain of Chen's innocence started admitting they'd been wrong. The vindication should have felt good, but all I felt was sadness for the 3 years Emma had endured, and for the system that had failed her, until she was brave enough to speak again. The criminal trial happened 4 months later. This time, I wasn't the defendant. I was a witness for the prosecution. David Chen's defense team tried the same tactics. Discredit Emma's testimony, paint her as confused and coached, argue that the injuries were accidental or self-inflicted. But with Dr. Park's official testimony, the pattern of hospital visits, Emma's consistent and detailed account, and the photographs she'd taken, the case against Chen was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Chen was sentenced to 12 years in prison with mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting Emma until she turned 18 and chose otherwise. I was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Emma wasn't there. The prosecutor had spared her that trauma, but I felt her presence anyway. When Chen was led away in handcuffs, He looked at me with pure hatred. I looked back without flinching. "You destroyed my life," he said, as the bailiff pulled him toward the door. "No," I replied quietly. "You destroyed your own life. I just made sure Emma survived it." The civil judgment against me was vacated shortly after. The district attorney's office issued a statement acknowledging that my initial report had been accurate and proper, and that I'd been wrongfully terminated. The school district reached a settlement with me. Full back pay, restoration of my teaching license, a formal apology, and a substantial financial settlement for wrongful termination and emotional distress. It was more money than Michael and I had ever had, enough to pay off our debts, rebuild our savings, and maybe even think about adoption someday. But the money wasn't what mattered. Emma mattered. She was placed with her maternal aunt Michelle, the woman who'd always suspected David Chen was dangerous. Michelle moved to our town to give Emma stability and continuity. She enrolled Emma in a new school across the district, a fresh start. 6 months after Chen's conviction, Michelle called and asked if I'd like to meet Emma for coffee. We met at a small cafe on a Saturday morning in September. Emma walked in holding Michelle's hand, and she looked different, healthier, more relaxed. Her eyes still carried sadness, but there was light in them too. "Hi, Ms. Matthews," she said shyly. "Hi, Emma." We sat down, and for a few minutes we made awkward small talk about school and books and the weather. Then Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on me." I felt tears welling up. "You saved yourself, Emma. You were brave enough to reach out. I just wish I could have done more sooner." "You did everything you could," she said with a wisdom far beyond her years. "Adults don't always believe kids, but you believed me. Even when I had to lie, you still believed me. That's why I knew I could call you. I'll always believe you," I promised. We talked for another hour. Emma told me about her new school, her therapy sessions, her plans to join the drama club. Michelle shared that Emma was doing remarkably well considering everything she'd endured, and that they were taking things one day at a time. When we left, Emma hugged me tight. "Are you teaching again?" she asked. "Not yet," I admitted. "I'm taking some time to figure out what's next." "You should teach," Emma said firmly. "You're really good at it, and kids need teachers who actually care." That conversation stayed with me. The following January, I accepted a position at a different school in a neighboring district, teaching 4th grade again, back where I belonged. On my first day, I looked at the 25 new faces and felt that familiar mix of excitement and responsibility. I also felt something else, a renewed commitment to never look away, never stay silent, never choose comfort over a child's safety. Because Emma's story could have ended so much worse. She could have been another statistic, another child lost to a system that didn't act fast enough or believe strongly enough. But she survived, and her survival came at a cost that I'd pay again in a heartbeat. This story is based on real events that happen in communities everywhere, including yours. Teachers, neighbors, and everyday people face these impossible choices between professional safety and moral duty. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? Have you ever witnessed something that made you choose between convenience and what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find courage. If there's one thing I learned from protecting Emma, it's this. Doing the right thing doesn't guarantee justice, but not doing the right thing guarantees injustice. When you see a child in danger, you'll face pressure to stay silent. People will tell you it's not your business, that you're overreacting, that you might be wrong. The system will protect the powerful and doubt the vulnerable. You'll risk your reputation, your career, maybe even your financial security. But here's the truth they don't tell you. Children can't protect themselves. They need adults who are willing to stand between them and harm, even when standing costs everything. If you're a teacher, a neighbor, a family friend, or anyone who interacts with children, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Report it. Document it. Don't let bureaucracy or fear silence you. If you're a child being hurt, you are believed. It might take time, and you might have to tell your story more than once. But there are people who will fight for you. Don't give up. If you're someone who stayed silent once, it's not too late to speak up now. Every voice matters. Every report could save a life. The system isn't perfect. Justice isn't guaranteed. But silence guarantees nothing changes. Emma is 13 now. She's thriving with her aunt, excelling in school, and talking about becoming a lawyer someday. To help kids like me, she says. She carries scars, physical and emotional, that will never fully fade. But she's alive, she's safe, she's free. And that's why I'd do it all again. For the teachers reading this, your job isn't just to educate, it's to protect. Don't let fear of consequences stop you from making that call. For the parents reading this, believe children. Listen to teachers who raise concerns. Don't let pride or defensiveness blind you to danger. For the survivors reading this, your truth matters. Your voice matters. Keep speaking. Keep fighting. Keep surviving. Because sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. And sometimes one person's courage changes everything. This is Touching Stories, reminding you that every child deserves a champion, someone who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection, and who insists they become the best they can possibly be. Until next time, choose courage.